Lewis's faith was not destroyed by suffering. It was refined, polished, expanded. He shows us that doubt is not the end of the journey, but an essential part of it. That questioning, feeling revolt or sadness does not mean an absence of faith, but rather the sincere search for a deeper meaning. And that's where a fundamental point comes in. The pain of grief can become a portal to hope. Lewis, even in the midst of despair, does not lose sight of eternity. The love that remains beyond physical separation, the promise of a reunion that transcends time, the certainty that death is not the definitive end. All this is a light that pierces the darkness of suffering. This perspective does not erase sadness or minimize pain, but offers a new outlook, a hidden truth that invites us to move forward with renewed faith. It is a transformation of mind and heart, an invitation to live the present marked by longing, but with our eyes fixed on heaven. And this journey, as Lewis so well knew, does not have to be solitary. Shared pain becomes less heavy when we have a community, a safe space to talk, cry, and be heard. Grief does not need to be silenced or disguised with platitudes. Emotional authenticity is an important step in healing, and the solidarity of those who walk alongside us can be a balm for the deepest wounds. Even when it seems that God is silent, as Lewis questions in his most difficult moments, we are not abandoned. This apparent absence can be part of the process, a waiting that prepares the ground for something greater. Proof that faith is an act of trust that goes beyond what the eyes can see. Time, like a patient old friend, helps to heal, but does not erase the marks. And that's where eternity becomes a foundation, a horizon that gives us meaning for the now, even if it is permeated by tears and longing. If you've ever found yourself at this crossroads between pain and hope, between loss and faith, know that this journey is more common than it seems, and that there is beauty and growth hidden even in the densest shadows. Comment. This makes sense to me. When faith seems to fail, God's silence can feel deafening. It's as if the world, once full of promises and certainties, has been put on pause, and heaven, which you always felt so close, now seems an immense, cold, unattainable distance. C.S. Lewis did not hesitate to expose this raw sensation, this anguish that so many feel, but few dare to verbalize. In his book, A Grief Observed, he writes not only as an intellectual, but as someone who, deeply wounded, found himself facing an emotional and spiritual abyss that challenged everything he believed. Imagine God's silence during grief. Not that comfort in silence that invites reflection, but painful void that echoes in unanswered questions, in prayers that seem to go nowhere, in nights where crying is the only voice we have.
It unfolds layer by layer as we allow ourselves to listen with our hearts and not just with our ears. Lewis reminds us that faith is not an escape from reality, but the most courageous confrontation of it. To believe for him was to walk with open eyes, even when the road disappears beneath our feet. It was to trust, even when the answer doesn't come. It was to love, even when love demands surrender. And perhaps this is the most unsettling beauty of it all. Christian faith doesn't spare us from pain. It accompanies us within it. It doesn't promise us there will be no night, but it guarantees that the light will not go out. That's why Lewis wrote so much about suffering, not as someone speaking from the outside, but as someone who traversed the darkness. He knew what it was to lose someone he loved. He knew what it was to ask why God is silent. He knew what it was to keep believing even with a broken heart. That's why his words reach us with such force, because they are not just ideas. They are wounds that became bridges. They are questions that became paths. They are pains that were not wasted. And if you, at any point in your life, have felt that your pain was too great to be put into words, know that you are not alone. Lewis was there too, and somehow he managed to put into phrases what the soul feels and can't always say. So stay. Remain here with us a little longer, because there is healing in listening. There is comfort in knowing that other voices have already crossed this valley. And there is a God who continues to speak, even when everything seemed silent. Let's explore together how grief, this experience so universal and at the same time so unique for each person, can transform not only our understanding of life and death, but also our very soul. C.S. Lewis shows us in his work the behind the scenes of this transformation, revealing truths that go beyond easy answers and ready-made words meant to comfort without touching the heart. The pain of loss, he teaches us, is not just the moment to be overcome, but a journey to be lived, a passage that can lead us to a new mindset, an openness to a greater reality, a revelation of eternity that hides behind earthly suffering. It is in this space between absence and hope that the mystery of faith reveals itself in its rawest and at the same time most beautiful form. Looking at Lewis's own experience, we see that his pain was not hidden or stifled. On the contrary, he delved deeply into this pain, questioning God, faith, life, and everything he thought was right. And it is precisely this courage to face the emptiness, to name the anguish, that makes his writing so intimate and impactful for so many who also face grief. But what strikes us in a special way is how this painful journey brings about an inner transformation.
He did not place himself as a master above others, but as a fellow traveler, full of doubts, who still chose to believe. He said, "Suffering is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world." But he also recognized that we would not always understand the reason for the pain. And that's okay, because faith does not demand an explanation. It demands surrender. And it is this surrender that transforms everything, not from the outside in as if by magic, but from the inside out, like a seed that breaks through the dark soil to seek the light. So perhaps the question today is not, why is God silent? But what is he building in me while I wait? God's silence is not absence. It is work. It is a whisper. It's a preparation. Is it difficult? Yes. Sometimes unbearable. But it is not in vain. And if you are experiencing this time of waiting, this feeling of praying and not getting an answer, or trusting even when everything screams the opposite, then you are exactly where many of the great men and women of faith have been. You are not off track. You are on the way. And if this message resonated within you, if it spoke to something you perhaps didn't even know you needed to hear, stay a little longer, because it's not over yet. Stay, because this type of truth isn't absorbed in a hurry. It needs to be felt slowly. It needs to find space in the heart, not the rushed space of everyday life, but the silent space where the soul breathes. And if you made it this far, maybe something pulled you. Something beyond a video, beyond curiosity. Maybe it was that sigh you gave last night alone, asking for some answer, for a sign, for a comfort that made sense. And here it is. Not because I'm saying something extraordinary, but because you are ready to hear what heaven whispers while the world screams. And since you made it this far, let me ask you one thing, not out of vanity, but out of mission. Share in the comments what has touched you the most of all. Talk to me. Talk to those who will come later. Sometimes when you write might be exactly what someone needed to read on a difficult day. Your voice matters. Your experience carries light. If this made sense to you, like this video. This seems like a small gesture, but it helps discount and reach more people who, like you, are looking for something beyond the noise, something with soul. And if you feel like you want to continue this journey with us, with these conversations, these sacred pauses in the midst of chaos, subscribe to the channel. It's here that we slow down together, reflect together, and rediscover God's presence between the lines of life. Because in the end, this channel isn't about me. It's about us. It's about you on the other side, finding meaning where it seemed to be only silence. Now take a deep breath.
And the most beautiful part is that even without our knowing, God continues to act. Perhaps not in the way we expected, nor at the speed we desired, but He is. Behind the scenes, in the details, in the coincidences that are not coincidences, and little by little, what seemed to be silence begins to sound like purpose. Now, take a deep breath with me. Close your eyes for a moment, if you can, and ask yourself, what is this pain trying to teach me? What is God showing me in the midst of this chaos? Stay with me, because the answer might be in the next breath. Perhaps the answer won't come as a voice from heaven, nor as a spectacular miracle. Perhaps it will come as a gentle reminder that you have already overcome things you thought impossible, like that day when everything seemed lost, but you decided to get out of bed anyway. Like that unexpected conversation that gave you strength. Like that song that played at the exact moment you needed to hear that you weren't alone. C.S. Lewis understood this. He knew that true faith is not built on certainties, but on doubts sustained by love. It is in that mysterious place between I don't know and yet I trust that the soul matures, that God works silently, transforming our pain into compassion, our loss into sensitivity, and our questions into bridges to reach others. And if this content is speaking to your heart right now, if at any point in this conversation you felt something truly touched you, leave it recorded here in the comments. Share a little of what you felt, what crossed your mind, because sometimes your comment might be exactly what someone else needed to read to not give up. When you like this video, YouTube understands that this message has value. And when you subscribe to the channel, you are saying, I want to continue on this journey. I want more of these moments of pause, reflection, and faith. And that makes all the difference. This space only exists because there are people like you on the other side, sensitive, present, willing to listen with their hearts. It is this kind of connection that transforms a simple video into something sacred. Now, let's continue, because there's still more to be said. And perhaps more than that, there is still much to be felt. And what still needs to be felt may not be in the words I'm about to say, but in what they awaken in you. Because deep down, what C.S. Lewis taught us and continues to teach us is that the greatest spiritual truths are not shouted but whispered. They arrive when we are quiet inside, when we no longer have the strength to fight against God's silence,
and then would begin to truly hear him. Sometimes it is at this point of surrender that true transformation is born.
This makes sense to me if at any point in this conversation you saw yourself reflected in Lewis's words or in the emotions that came to the surface. This is a journey, and knowing that you are on it too gives meaning to everything we are building together. And perhaps amidst all this, you're wondering if anyone else has felt this pain, if anyone else has looked at the sky waiting for an answer and all they found was silence. The truth is, yes, you are not alone. There are thousands of people carrying the same questions, trying to move forward while still loving those who were left behind. And that's why this space exists, to talk about this with truth, with depth, with soul. If in any way this topic touched your heart, if this story resonated within you, I want to invite you to leave a comment below. Share with me, have you experienced something similar? How did you find the strength to continue? Or perhaps you are still in this place of silence, of waiting. You can write whatever you feel. Sometimes venting is already a first step toward healing. And that this video is making you reflect, if it's opening something within you, like this content. This helps a lot, not only the channel, but also so that this type of message reaches other people who, like you, might need to hear this today. Your click, your like, your comment, they make a real difference. And if you feel that you want to continue this journey with us, subscribe to the channel here. Here we talk about soul, about pain, about faith, about new beginnings, always based on the teachings of C.S. Lewis, which show us that even pain can become part of the miracle. Stay with me, because what comes next will take you even deeper. Let's continue this conversation. C.S. Lewis said, God whispers in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Pain is God's megaphone to arouse the death world. Perhaps at this moment in your life, pain has been that megaphone. Perhaps it was what brought you here, what made you seek deeper answers, what made you look inward with more honesty. And that's not weakness, that's courage. Because it takes courage to admit that we don't have all the answers. Courage to face God's silences without ceasing to trust. Courage to love even knowing that everything is finite. Courage to keep believing that there is something beyond what we see. And when you begin to tread this path, you are no longer alone. You are part of a silent community, but deeply connected by this search for meaning. This is the kind of conversation that transforms. And that's why staying here matters. Because every view, every comment, every subscription is like a candle lit in darkness. And with many candles light up together, the darkness begins to recede. You are part of this. You make a difference here.
Not just in our memory, but in the invisible reality of heaven. Lewis saw heaven not as an escape from reality, but as the full culmination of truth. Longing is the form of love that time has not yet healed, he would say, and eternity is what completely heals. Still, his journey of faith was not a straight line. He admits that for a time, he thought that perhaps everything he believes was just an illusion. But it is precisely there that his story strengthens us. Because even with the shaken faith, he kept searching. He did not deny his doubts. He went through them. And in going through them, he found something even firmer than certainties. He found the presence of God, even in silence. And this is a difficult truth to accept, but liberating when understood. God is not absent, even when he seems silent. There are times when he does not answer as we expect, but that does not mean he has turned his face away from us. Lewis writes that God is like a father holding his child in his arms, even when the child doesn't realize it. That his silence sometimes is just the sound of our pain overshadowing everything. And perhaps this is what teaches us most about grief, that it doesn't have to be carried alone. Lewis reminds us that shared pain is divided pain, that talking about what we feel doesn't weaken us, it relieves us. The very act of writing a grief observed was a gesture of healing, not only for him, but for millions of readers around the world who, upon opening those pages, felt, I am not the only one. This is the fresh reminder. Pain needs space. It needs to be named, heard, embrace. And when we share it with others, something within us begins to reorganize. Not that the longing goes away, but it begins to breathe at a different rhythm. It's as if by being seen, it finds its place. Lewis said that even on the darkest days, the light of eternity never stops shining. Perhaps faint, perhaps distant, but always present. And that this light is what sustains us when everything seems to lose meaning. Christian hope is not empty optimism, but a confidence built on the truth that death is not the end of the story. That in Christ there is life beyond pain, reunion beyond absence, love beyond time. Time here, of course, has the troll. It doesn't erase the pain, but softens the edges. It doesn't replace the one who left, but teaches us to continue carrying with us all that remained. Faith, when renewed, doesn't erase the longing, it transforms it into longing with hope. And this hope is not just a distant theological concept, it is a truth that can touch the heart now. The pain of separation, however intense, is not capable of erasing what love is built. What is true remains. What is eternal does not fade away.
He doesn't have all the answers and doesn't try to appear strong. There, he allows himself to be fragile. He questions, cries, revolts. And perhaps that is precisely why this work is so powerful, because it does not present a manual for overcoming, but a true portrait of the human soul in the face of the deepest pain, the loss of a loved one. Lewis writes that in the midst of grief, he felt as if he knocked on God's door and heard from the other side silence. You call and there is no reply. It seems like a locked door with iron locks and the sound of footsteps moving away. This image, so simple, carries a pain that many know, but do not always have the courage to express. How many times in the midst of suffering do we wait for a sign, for a peace to visit us, for some presence to tell us, I am here, but all we feel is the echo of our own crying. Lewis was not afraid to admit his faith was shaken, not destroyed, but trembled. And this honesty is what makes his journey so inspired, because he teaches us that even a mature faith can be crossed by doubt. And that, contrary to what many think, this does not mean that God abandoned us. It simply means that we are human, fragile and real, and that God meets us exactly there, in the midst of emotional chaos, a broken heart, and a shattered hope. Grateful for Lewis is not something that is resolved with ready answers. On the contrary, he believes that the only way to face it is by naming the pain, admitting what we feel, recognizing that we have anger, longing, confusion, and even a certain fear of continuing. He says that the pain of grief is not like a disease that passes with time, but like a scar that transforms us. And it is precisely for this reason that pretending everything is fine can be one of the biggest mistakes. Instead, he invites authenticity, the courage to say, today is difficult, the freedom to allow oneself to feel and not just function. Pain only dissolves when it is embraced, felt, listened to. Lewis encourages us to live the pain, not to ignore it, because for him, true love carries a price, that of longing. But this price, however high it may seem, also reveals how real that love was. And here's an important turning point. Even in the midst of pain, Lewis never stopped believing in eternal love. He knew, and you may feel this too, that love does not end when someone leaves. Death can end an earthly coexistence, but it does not erase the bonds of the soul. He believed that there is something greater than time and stronger than death, eternity. This concept may seem distant when grief is still fresh, but as the days pass, it becomes the beacon, the promise of reunion, the certainty that those who died in Christ remain alive.
So take a deep breath, allow yourself to feel, and stay with me. Because the journey that begins now can change the way you face loss and even rekindle your faith. In the next part, we will delve deeper into C.S. Lewis's thoughts on pain, longing, and time, and discover how these reflections can transform the way we face grief without erasing the pain, but learning to live with it in the light of eternity. And perhaps you too have experienced this. The absence of the one who left leaves an echo in our days, a kind of screaming silence amidst daily tasks. You continue living, but something in you seems to have stopped in time. You may have tried to move on, resumed your routine, returned to work, talked to people, but deep down something always pulls you back to that moment when the loss occurred. And sometimes all we need is someone to say, "I felt that too. You are not alone." That's why this space exists, because there are pains that cannot be contained in silence, and when we find words that translate what the soul is trying to say, something within us begins to breathe again. And if in some way this conversation is touching you, if this topic stirs memories or helps you see something more clearly, I want to invite you to leave a comment below. Share what touched you or what you experienced. What you write might be exactly what someone else needed to read today. Go ahead and like this video too. It helps more than it seems. YouTube understands that this content is relevant and delivers it to more people who may need to hear exactly this right now. And if this kind of conversation makes sense to you, if you want to continue reflecting, feeling, and learning from the wisdom of authors like C.S. Lewis, subscribe to this channel. Every new subscription is like a seed planted so that these messages continue to reach more hearts. And speaking of the heart, there's something Lewis reveals to us about grief and love that we haven't explored yet. A deep aspect, almost hidden in lines of his pain and his face. Stay with me, because what comes next might open windows you never even knew were closed. C.S. Lewis was not only a great Christian thinker, author of books like Mere Christianity and The Chronicles of Narnia. He was also a man deeply marked by love and, consequently, by loss. His relationship with Joy Davidman was not a fairy tale narrative, but a real story, with improbable encounters, pain, faith, and new beginnings. They married when Joy was already sick, and when the illness progressed, leading to her death a few years later, Lewis did not take refuge in ready-made formulas of comfort. He wrote A Grief Observed, a raw, honest, and at times unsettling diary about grief. It is touching to realize that this man, so accustomed to arguing with logic and clarity about the mysteries of faith, in this book simply...
In A Grief Observed, he writes, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. And anyone who has cried over the loss of someone knows fear does come. Fear of emptiness, fear of forgetting, fear of continuing to live, fear of never feeling joy again. Fear of not being able to bear the absence. But why is the pain of separation so intense? Perhaps because, deep down, human beings were not created for death. There is something within us that screams that it shouldn't be this way, that love shouldn't end in a coffin, that the laughter of those we love should continue to echo, that embrace should last longer. And that's where faith meets grief, in the pain that pushes us to seek meaning beyond this world. C.S. Lewis believed that pain is not the end, that eternity is not an illusion, that there's something, or rather someone, who remains even when everything falls apart. But to reach that certainty, he had to cross the desert of loss. He had to face the dark night of the soul. He had to admit that even being one of the greatest Christian thinkers of the 20th century, he also had his moments of doubt, anger, despair. And that doesn't diminish his faith. On the contrary, it makes it more human, more real, more identifiable, because no one goes to grief without asking, where is God in all this? And if that question has also burned within you, know that this video is for you. Here, we won't pretend that faith arrests pain, but together, we will try to understand how it can help us carry it differently. Have you ever imagined that perhaps your grief is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new kind of relationship with the sacred?
that perhaps that unbearable pain is making room for a deeper revelation about God's love? What if eternity is closer than we imagine? What if physical absence is not the end of presence? Perhaps you are asking yourself now, but how can I believe this when all I feel is missing, longing, and emptiness? And that's exactly why we are here, to walk together in this delicate and often solitary territory of grief, to look at Lewis's words, at the truths of the Christian faith, and to find in them not a superficial relief, but a hope that takes root even in dry soil. Throughout this video, we will reflect on grief in the light of eternity. We will understand why the pain of separation can be so devastating, but also how it can point to something greater. We will talk about heaven, about time, about reunion, about the language of faith and the face of the silence of death. We will delve into excerpts from a grief observed, extract deep lessons from them, and above all, we will remember that the pain we feel is proportional to the love we had.
Have you ever lost someone and felt as if the world stopped spinning? As if from one moment to the next, everything that once made sense now seemed empty, distant, even irrelevant? Have you found yourself staring at the sky in silence, waiting for some answer to come from there, any sign, any comfort, and all you found was a silence that felt as painful as the absence of the one who left? If you've experienced this or are experiencing it now, you know exactly the weight of grief. And if you haven't walked this path yet, sooner or later it will present itself to you. Death doesn't ask if we are ready. It just arrives. And when it arrives, it takes much more than a body. It takes a piece of our history, our daily lives, our soul. An echo remains, a screaming absence, a scent on clothes, a name we can no longer pronounce without choking, a Sunday that will never be the same again. But how to deal with loss and grief with faith? Does faith truly console, or does it just mask a pain that no one can truly explain? And furthermore, what does eternity have to do with all this? What does the Bible say about grief? And how can the teachings of an author like C.S. Lewis, who delved deeply into this pain, help us reframe loss and see suffering from another perspective? Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to discover might surprise you and perhaps even heal parts of you that have been silently hurt for a long time. The story begins with pain, but it's not just any pain. It's the pain of someone who loved intensely, and precisely for that reason felt the brutal impact of absence. C.S. Lewis, author of classics like Mere Christianity and The Chronicles of Narnia, perhaps never wrote anything as visceral and personal as A Grief Observed, a book he did not sign with his name when he published it. Such was the level of emotional exposure. Because in that book, Lewis does not speak as a theologian. He does not write as a philosopher. He writes as a grieving man, a man who deeply loved his wife and lost her to cancer. And there, in those raw and intense pages, he lets all masks fall. He doesn't try to appear strong. He doesn't try to give ready answers. On the contrary, he exposes his doubts, his anguish, his questions about God, about pain, about time, about the soul. And perhaps that's why this book is so powerful, because in it, Lewis gives us permission to feel. He shows us that true faith is not one that denies pain, but one that walks through the dark valley with tear-filled eyes and still chooses to keep going. Have you ever felt this? Have you found yourself questioning, God, why someone so good had to leave? Have you been ashamed to confess that even believing you were angry with him? That the longing was so great that faith seemed insufficient? If so, you are not alone. And Lewis wasn't either.
Why does God seem so distant when we need him most? This question is not just a lament. It is a cry that carries the internal struggle of one who feels abandoned, lost in a storm where faith wavers, stumbles, but does not completely disappear. This silence is not a sign of definitive absence, but an invitation to cross the darkness, a call to a faith that does not depend on immediate comfort, but that seeks meaning even in emptiness. Lewis shows us that this is a legitimate stage of the grief journey. Questioning, doubting, feeling distance from God are not spiritual failures. They are part of the path to a deeper and more authentic faith. Silence can be a different form of response, a response that challenges, transforms, and eventually renews. By experiencing this pain, we are invited to abandon the idea of a perfect faith immune to suffering, to embrace the complexity of our human condition. It is here that one of the greatest truths hidden in the experience of grief resides, that God often does not speak with clear and comforting words, but whispers in silence, works behind the scenes of our suffering, and walks with us in never tearshed. This moment is for many a radical transformation in spiritual mindset. It is the confrontation between the hope that sustains us and the painful reality that surrounds us. The faith that seemed solid reveals its fragility, but paradoxically, it is in this fragility that grace can flourish with greater intensity, not because God has failed us, but because he accompanies us in vulnerability, showing that we do not need to carry the burden alone. Thus, God's silence in grief becomes a sacred space, fertile ground for inner transformation. The journey through pain is not a linear path, but full of twists and turns, unexpected revelations, and decisions that shape our view of the world and the divine. The impact of this experience goes beyond the present. It can redefine our spirituality, the way we understand love, hope, and eternity. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for being with me in this sincere and deep conversation. If this content resonated with you, leave a comment here with the phrase that touched your heart the most. It can be, I'm with you to the end, or this message was for me. Knowing that we are together on this journey makes all the difference to me and to this channel, because that's how this message can reach even more people who need to hear this today. If you're finding value in the space, a like already helps a lot to keep this work alive, showing that the connection we build here is real and meaningful. And there's a video here next to this one that complements this topic that can further expand this reflection. Click and continue with me there. Let's keep going together. Thank you for being here from my heart.